The first round of lockdowns, it felt like it kind of brought people together in a weird way. And this time round, you can feel the frustration. There's way more hostility. Obviously, the dealing with the masks and the soon-to-be, I guess, vaccination mandates and that sort of thing is like a total different kettle of fish.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Everyone has a story. Every idea has a story. Every key moment in life has a backstory. And every hospitality venue, every hospitality professional has a story. And in the last year and a half, those stories have become much richer than any of us could have expected. Maddison Howes is the co-owner of Saga in Enmore. Maddison, how are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Your venue, Saga, was a bit of a saga to pull together, and now the last year and a half has probably been described that way by many.
Yep.
How are things at the moment in Sydney?
Yeah, things for us aren't too bad at the moment. I think we've been lucky in some respects. I think with everything that's going on, cafes and bakeries have probably had it somewhat easier than other venues in hospitality like bars and restaurants. But of course, there's still been plenty of unknowns and a lot of ups and downs.
Your venue wasn't all that old when all of this sort of took place. It had only been around for a year or two. What's it like having such a young business and then having the tables turned like that? Yeah,
I think for us, we've been 4 years now. So, probably 2.5 years before it started. We also had opened a second venue probably 6 months before COVID hit, which was a little kind of spin-off of Saga, which was Saga Light, which was down in Darling Square. That was probably our biggest loss during COVID. Once the first kind of lockdown happened, I don't think it was really the right business decision for us in the first place, but once we closed doors, we were kind of lucky enough to have the opportunity to hand over the lease. So that was something we did, and we got rid of that one. But in Enmore, it's definitely a different feel. It's a lot more of a neighbourhood area, so there's some benefits that come with that.
Saga has made an incredible name for itself. With you running the ship and your partner Andy's incredible creations as well. What's it been like, the attention that the business has got in its short life?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been at times kind of humbling, I guess. When we first opened, I guess Andy had already established a bit of a reputation. With that comes high expectations. It's not always easy receiving feedback, I guess, for your first business. I think over the last 4 years we've kind of realised things like you got to get thicker skin and you're not going to please everybody. So you kind of have to find that balance of doing things that, customers want to see, but also things that you enjoy doing, because at the end of the day, it's what you're going to spend a lot of hours in your week dedicating your life to. So you kind of want it to be something that, reflects both of us.
I want to get into the story of the creation of Saga shortly, but take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play with you and your family growing up?
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, my great-grandfather was a baker. My grandparents were bakers.
Wow.
And then my mum and dad owned the same bakery, which they got rid of, I think, when I was about, I want to say 2 or 3, because, getting up at 2 a.m. to bake bread is not a great idea with small kids. So I didn't really experience, I guess, that part of the bakery and small business and stuff because I was so small. But things like birthday cakes, my family always obviously went pretty hard on birthday cakes and stuff as a kid and that. But besides that, we moved to the Snowy Mountains when I was a teenager. I went to high school in Cooma, and it was a pretty kind of plain, suburban, boring, white food life that I lived. My parents are decent cooks, but my dad loves the barbecue, so there was a lot of steak and veg a lot. Steak and veg, pork and veg, meat and veg, sometimes salad. But, it kind of wasn't until my first hospitality job. I was, I think, 15. I got a job at this café in Cooma, run by this couple, Matt and Adam. And that was my first real experience of hospitality. And I think that's probably where I learned a lot of, I guess, the foundations of front of house. And, Matt, who ran it, was quite firm and he was passionate about what he did. And that definitely rubs off on younger people.
Well, take us back to that time. What were some of the experiences that you had there and the lessons that you learned? Do you have any stories of that time?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously at school at the time, so it was just like a little weekend job. And when you first start off and you're only 15 years old, you're not allowed any responsibility at all, really, which is fair enough. But he definitely, just little things like he had this real issue with any staff who dawdled around the floor. So he used to say, you always walk with a purpose, even if you don't have anything to do, even if it's a quiet day. When you walk from A to B, no dawdling, look like you're doing, there's purpose in. And so it's just kind of those funny little things that kind of stick with you forever, I guess. And then I remember that was probably the first experience of the kind of camaraderie of hospitality, and they'd held a I guess a little staff party dinner thing at their house. It was a lunch, I think, and I would have been 16, 17, and they loved kind of classic French food, and they cooked they just had a little outdoor barbecue thing, and I remember they did this kind of grilled bread with pate, and then they topped it off with these warm caramelized onions. And I just remember eating this food as a 17-year-old, just being what is this? What is going on? And they just did like all these beautiful veggies on the grill and just seasoned with, a bit of lemon juice, salt, olive oil. And it was all kind of family style. And yeah, I think that was a real moment for me to kind of be like, there's a really great world here.
Tell us about the stepping stones. You mentioned you were still at school when you were doing this part-time job, but when did you first sort of step foot for a full-time role in hospitality?
Yeah, so I moved to Sydney when I was 18 to go to uni. So I actually did a degree in design in visual communications at UTS. So I moved out of home, moved up to Ultimo, lived, on campus essentially there just next to Haymarket, which of course coming from, a country town where you've got, we had one Chinese restaurant, one Thai restaurant, there was a Lebanese restaurant, and then that was about it. To them being right on the kind of edge of Haymarket, that was a real awakening. And then I've always worked in hospitality as the part-time gig, which is I guess what a lot of people do. So I worked in, a couple of bars and that sort of thing while I was at uni, and little odd jobs here and there. And then I guess when I was in probably my third year of uni, I took a job at Hart's Yard. They'd just opened back when Naomi Hart and Gregory Llewellyn had the business. And I took a job as essentially a part-time bartender originally, which I feel like that was a huge influence. Naomi and Greg were huge influences on, I'd say probably me and Andy for that matter. But I think I was afforded a lot of opportunity working for them and kind of taking over different roles and stepping up and growing. And then by the time I finished my degree in design, it just wasn't, I was working almost full-time hours and kind of being like, I'd done all these internships with design, and I just don't know if I could. I'd done a couple of internships that were quite corporate, and I just didn't know if I could go to sitting, on a floor full of 200 people in my little cubicle and designing little ads for the side of websites, which is what my internship was at the time with Fairfax. And I loved what I was doing at Heartsyard, and I loved the people and I loved the team. So I kind of went, all right, well, like maybe I'll just stay here for a bit, and then I'll see, I want to do a bit more travel. I want to do some things before I really kind of commit to, and I put air quotations in when I say a real job, because I know a lot of people don't think that hospitality is necessarily a real job when you're young. There's a lot of people who are kind of doing it as a side gig. So yeah, that's kind of where it all started.
Tell us about Heartsyard. Naomi and Gregory made an incredible impact on the inner west and Sydney's dining landscape with Heartsyard, and you were there for the ride. What was it that was so special about that menu?
I would have to say it would have been Naomi and Greg. I don't think I've met such kind of generous and great people. It was a real family atmosphere. It was a real small business. Like you saw the ups and downs, and you really got to experience that with them. I started as a casual bartender and then eventually took over. I guess I'd learned a fair bit about wine with the help of Ned Brooks and Mike Benny kind of in my ear, helping me along when I needed it, and then moved on to eventually managing and hosting and kind of a bit of a jack of all trades kind of role. But yeah, the teams there, they always had really great people working for them, and, it really opened your eyes to like all hospitality businesses, you end up working beside people you'd never meet, and people from all different walks of life and different cultures. And yeah.
Tell us about what it was like working with Andy there as well. You mentioned that it was quite an influence on his career as well. What was that period of time like for both of you in Heartsyard?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously where we met. Andy had worked with Greg previously at Wildfire, and when Greg opened his own venue, he asked Andy to kind of come along. So he'd been there right from the very beginning, as I think I came on a couple of months into being open. And then, yeah, I guess Andy ended up getting this, at the time, really bizarre social media following. It was kind of around the era where Instagram was quite new still, and it just kind of took on a little world of its own. And then eventually he had to make the decision whether he wanted to pursue that, take the opportunity and run with it, or kind of stay. And so eventually he left to focus on the cakes, and I stayed around for a bit. And then we kind of decided that the next step forward would be to open something. And I've always loved cafe culture, and pastry lends itself pretty well to a daytime venue. So that's, I guess, when Saga was conceived.
How long was the idea of Saga in place before you finally opened the doors?
I think that's a great question. At the time, I was just still working at Heartsyard, enjoying what I was doing, and Andy kind of was using some space out of Messina's. He knows the guys over at Messina, and they really kindly offered for him to use their space when they closed at night to make the cakes, while we looked for our own space and kind of organised things. So I think it probably took probably about a year and a half, and we were pretty naive at the time. Like we took on a space. Obviously, we knew Enmore at the time, and we took on a space that, quite frankly, we took because it had low rent and already had a kitchen, and we didn't have business partners and that sort of thing. So we wanted to start small, and we stupidly kind of did things like tried to really budget by not having a building manager, we thought, why wouldn't we save 10% by managing people ourselves? But having never done a fit out or anything, it just drags the time out because, the electrician turns up and says, well, I can't do that until somebody digs this hole. And then you're like, okay, well, I'll get that person to come in and do that. And they're like, well, I can't do that until, the plumber's been, and I can't do that. And then all of a sudden it's taken you 6 months to get your shit together and open the doors. Should have just paid the 10%.
Well, tell us about the idea behind the name and how it emerged.
So the name was just really hard for us, and it's almost harder than naming a child because in a way you have more options. The options are absolutely endless. But Andy is an avid sneaker collector. So I said, just go and, get a whole bunch of words from, sneaker inspo. So essentially he came back to me with a list of, I guess, words inspired by shoes. So Saga's actually named after an Asics shoe, which is a model he particularly liked, and it kind of made sense to me because, the Saga continues, and why not?
Tell us about the creation and the concept of Saga. What were you offering, and how different was it to the cafes of the area?
Yeah, so this was, I would say, like one of the bigger learning curves that we had. When we first opened, we really didn't want to be like other cafes. We really didn't want to, there were plenty of people at the time doing really good cafes. Andy and I used to frequent Cornersmith in Marrickville weekly, religiously. And we didn't want to do, we wanted to do us, and we wanted to do different. We're both from restaurant backgrounds. So a lot of the dishes were, I guess, a little bit quirkier. We didn't do, you couldn't order, eggs and sides. We wanted them to be complete dishes. The pastries we wanted to be like a little bit left of field and a little bit more interesting. But, like we kind of, at the start, we were like, no, we don't want to do a bacon and egg roll. And like, no, we don't want to do avocado toast. Like we want to, just do some things that are different, like, shake it up a little. But at the end of the day, there's a reason that people want those things. And so eventually, I remember the first time, I think it was probably like maybe 8 months after we'd opened, and Andy put on this sandwich as a special that was just called a brekkie sanger. And it was just, bacon, egg, hash brown, pimento cheese, barbecue sauce, and in between, fluffy white sandwich bread. And it's still like one of the most popular sandwiches on our menu, because that's what people want at the end of the day. And you can still put your own little twist on it. But it's a fine line, kind of doing things that you want to do, and also understanding that at the end of the day, like, it's the customers that are going to pay your bills. It's the customers that are going to pay your staff. Like, you gotta find that balance.
You were the restaurant manager of an award-winning restaurant at Hart's Yard. How different was that compared to running your own small business?
Oh, so different. Firstly, because we were lucky at Hart's Yard. They had a hat at the time, and a lot of people would go out to dinner when they're celebrating things, or they're catching up with people, and you kind of know before service you've got, you're gearing up for a service, and you've got all these bookings, and people are there to enjoy themselves. People are there to have a good time and to celebrate and to enjoy the moment, and to take the, let's say, 2 hour sitting, and there's a real kind of journey with a restaurant sitting, from the time that you walk in to the time that you leave, and kind of all of the, I guess, the steps in between that the restaurant takes to provide that. But going to a daytime venue is just so different because it feels like everybody's in a rush. So everybody wants everything fast. So you go from having this nice moment where you get to be involved in a 2 hour period of somebody's day to probably seeing people a lot more frequently, but you see a lot more impatience. You definitely, people want, their coffee fast, their food fast, their pastries fast. They want to be in and out. I mean, obviously when we had a lot more dine-in, then you get the people who are, want to take their time and sit and have a coffee and relax. But overall, it's a different beast, and it's a different pace. So that took a bit of getting used to.
This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW. What's it been like with you and Andy running a business? Do you have separated roles, and how do you run it together?
Yeah, so I guess because we worked together when we met, and I was always very, focused on front of house, and he was in the back. I don't know. There's a mutual respect there that you have. I'm a terrible baker. Like, I'm not helping anybody back there. So, he's obviously in charge of that. I do kind of all the other bits, So a little bit of bookkeeping, a little bit of all the admin, dealing with the customers, that sort of thing. And I think we balance each other well in that respect.
What's some of the challenges and hurdles that you've got over running a small business that perhaps surprised you before getting into it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when we told people we wanted to open a place, the amount of people that were like, "Are you sure? Like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of responsibility, blah blah." And we were kind of like, "Yeah, but like, what else are we going to do? Like, it's not. That seems like the next step for us, and that sort of thing." But I think the hardest bit is often staff, finding the right team. We're really lucky. We've been really lucky, especially during COVID, that we've had such good people and such a good team. But I think I do think a team makes and breaks a business. So the hard thing is, I guess, with running a kind of more casual and daytime venue is that it's hard to get staff that want to stay around. Just like when I was 17 and through to my early 20s, it's often a side job for a lot of people while they're studying or while they're moving through, and getting people to stay and that be a career is often a challenge. It's the sad thing about hospitality is it's kind of, I don't think it's respected enough in Australia as a career choice. I even remember when I was managing Hearts Yard, and I loved my job, loved everything about it, and I was really happy. And even my parents would be like, "Oh, so like when are you gonna use your degree? Like, when are you gonna get a real job?" type thing. So much to their dismay, I'm still here, but.
You mentioned how important the team is and the issues with staff. What does it take to get the best out of your staff and the team?
Yeah, I think from a management point of view, it's always going to be finding what drives people. Some people are interested in money, not a lot in hospitality. And if you are interested in money, it's not a small business you're going to be working for. For some people, it's convenience, the fact that chefs could still come and work for us and not be working nights. People with families, that's often probably a bit more appealing. Yeah. Do they want recognition? Are they someone who, like Andy wants to, ended up with like a following? Do they want, I guess, public praise? Do they want to kind of, I don't know, you've got to kind of work out what people are after, but also at the same time, you got to understand that people are never going to work as hard for your business as you're going to work. And so trying to, I guess, curb your expectations that people are not you, and people are not going to be willing to work as hard as you or as long as you or all that sort of stuff. And I guess that's, you want to make them feel like part of the family so that they feel, I guess how I did when I worked at Heartsyard, like I cared.
What have you learned in the last year and a half about operating a business?
Yeah, I mean, the last year and a half's been an absolute whirlwind. I think the first thing we learnt was trying to open a second business, know when to cut your losses, know when to walk away. At that point when COVID first started, it was a bit like, amputating an arm to save the body. And, at the end of the day, Saga and Enmore is the kind of heart and soul. So it wasn't a super hard choice to have to close the second business, mostly because it was already causing us so much heartache that, it just seemed like the right thing to do. But I think when the first round of lockdowns happened in 2020, it really made me appreciate how lucky we were to be in a neighbourhood, and there was a lot of people who kind of rallied and a lot of people who supported us. And, I think this time around we still have that definite neighbourhood support, but you can feel the frustration, I think, with this lockdown a lot more than the first. The first one, people didn't know what was coming. Everyone was really scared. Everyone was really anxious. So there was a real kind of rallying, I guess, of everybody. It felt together. The first round of lockdowns, it felt like it kind of brought people together in a weird way. And this time round, you can feel the frustration. There's way more hostility. Obviously, the dealing with the masks and the soon-to-be, I guess, vaccination mandates and that sort of thing is like a total different kettle of fish.
Has it changed the way you approach your business and the offering as well?
Yeah, so when we first opened, we did brunch and probably 4 different sandwiches. And then when lockdown happened the first time, we were like, oh, we'll just move a lot of the brunch dishes to takeaway. But the only thing we were selling was sandwiches. So we had all this, prep and stuff. So we moved a lot of the dishes into basically sandwich form. Similar idea. So things like we used to do mushrooms on toast that were really popular, and we were like, okay, well, we'll just have to turn that into a mushroom toasted sandwich and these sorts of things. And so now we have 12 sandwiches on the menu and there's no brunch. So we do all the pastries and things and then the sandwiches. And then we ended up just sticking with it because it worked. It worked better for back of house. Way less wastage. The prep was more efficient, that sort of thing. And then because so many people were working from home, like a sandwich is something that people want during the week at the end of the day. So yeah, we were lucky in that respect. It wasn't that hard for us to pivot the menu and that sort of thing. But we'll stay with that. And it's sad because you get people that bring up dishes that used to be on the menu and they're like, oh, will you ever bring that back? But I just don't think we will.
Saga is known as one of the best cafes in Sydney, but what do you think makes a great local cafe?
I think that's a good question. I think the one thing that obviously the product is super important. Consistency in product in particular. I think there's nothing worse than going somewhere and being totally amazed and then going back the next week and the same dish you had being totally different. But also service, seeing the same faces. People like the familiarity in that people have real routine when it comes to cafes. We're the same. I still, I have my local cafe where I get my coffee on my day off. And we love trying new things and stuff, but you always end up coming back to your routine.
What is it that you love about what you do?
Ooh. I would say I love that every day is different. In hospitality, you'll never, ever get 2 days the same. I love feeling like a tiny bit involved in people's day, even if it's not anything major. It's kind of nice. There's a nice connection you have with people. I love getting to meet and work with people from just such different walks of life. And yeah, I think I've made kind of a lot of lifelong friendships in hospitality, and yeah, been quite lucky with my experience.
Friends and professionals in the industry advised you against opening your own business when you were setting out to do that. But what advice would you have for young people looking to open their first business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not easy. And it's a really good way to learn things really fast. But I think, like, you know, my mum actually said to us when we first opened, at the end of the day, like, what have you got to lose? Like, we were still young enough that if it all, you know, flopped, we don't have a mortgage because we live in Sydney and that's near impossible. So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have kids. Like, we're still young. If at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and you move on to the next thing. And I think that people need to get over the taboo of failure and give it a red hot crack, because if people aren't going to give it a go, then the rest of us aren't going to have anywhere to go.
You almost didn't have a career in hospitality. You were destined for another path, but it lured you in. How has hospitality changed your life for the better?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think the hospitality industry is an interesting one, because the camaraderie, I would say, and particularly during COVID, has been like no other. During lockdowns, when you go and grab some takeaway from your favourite restaurant, the amount of people who are just so kind and generous and, you know, going through the same anxiety-inducing times as you are, just, you know, happy to throw in a bottle of wine and just know that we're all in this together, and yeah, you feel like you're a part of something a bit bigger, which is a great feeling.
Well, Maddison, it's been an absolute honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.